19B3 on the bottom right. It says in Pasuk that Hashem told the house of Yaakov that he freed Abraham. The Gemara is looking at it directly as Yaakov freed Abraham, and it says Yaakov. And where do you have that Yaakov freed Abraham? Amr Yehuda said, Yehuda said because Yaakov freed Abraham from raising children. What does this mean? So you look in Rashi. Rashi says, "Shepado mitzar gidul banim, shehutal alav tayrach hashvatim shal Avraham hayamutal oto tayrach." That this job of this burden, right? The hardship of raising children, Yaakov took it upon himself. Why? Because it says by Abraham Avinu, that you have a lot of children, but Abraham didn't have the shvatim. Yaakov had the shvatim instead. So really, Abraham should have had the shvatim, as Hashem promised him. He didn't. Yaakov had it instead. So Yaakov freed up Abraham from raising the children. Now, if you look at Tosafot on the right side of the page, the bottom Tosafot, right? So there's you see Shepada Mitzar Gidul Banim, Perishat Kuntras. Kuntras is Rashi, right? It's pamphlets that Rashi used to write. He's known as Kuntras. Perishat Kuntras, Gidul Yudbet. Shvatim, that it was raising the 12 Shvatim. That's how Yaakov freed of Abraham. The Loy Nira, it's not right. Chada, one reason why it's not right. The Eino Tsar, Elo Simcha, raising children is not a pain, rather it's happiness. According to Tosafot, raising children is happiness, it's not pain. Kidam Rinon, like we learned, Gabe Oyvet Edom. This was the man who they left the Aron HaKodesh with for quite a while. Shebaruch Hashem bebanim, that Hashem blessed him with children. B'schar ha'aron, in the schar and the reward of the Aron she'eva beto. Then he says furthermore why it doesn't make sense, because the Abraham hayulo banim k'tura. Abraham had a bunch of children from his other wife Keturah. V'tzarech laimar. So he had pain raising them, right? So what does this mean? It means that really the trouble between Yosef and his brothers should have happened to Abraham. Abraham should have had the Shvatim, and all the trouble between Yosef and his brothers should have happened. But it happened to Yaakov instead. Going down to Mitzrayim should have happened to Abraham, the whole family. But happened with Yaakov instead. The story of Dinah happened with Yaakov and not with Abraham. So in that sense, that's what he took him away from. That's the way Tosafot learns. Continuing the Gemara on 19b4, and that's why it says, Lo atai yevosh Yaakov. Yaakov will not be ashamed. The way Iyun Yaakov explains this piece of the Gemara is that as the generations move on, every generation gets weaker than the previous generation. And that's further away from creation, further away from Matan Torah, which was creation. But Yaakov, even though he was further away from Abraham, he's not going to be embarrassed. He's standing on the same footstool of Abraham. In fact, he's even greater. He's the Bechir Sheba Avot. He's the most special of all the fathers. In fact, his faith is on the throne of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do we know this? Lo atah yevosh Yaakov. Yaakov will not be embarrassed. Lo atah yevosh Yaakov me'aviv. You'll not be embarrassed from your father, Yitzchak. Lo atah panag yacharu. And you're not going to be embarrassed me'avi from your great grandfather, because of Yaakov having all the shvatim and freeing up Abraham and Yitzchak. In that sense, he became as great as them, and he did their job. That's the way that Iyun Yaakov explains that in Gemara. Okay, now the Gemara continues. We're going to come to Palti. Tiv. It says Palti. In one place, the man that Shaul gave Michal to, his name was Palti. Uchtiv, and somewhere else it says, another pasuk it says Paltiel. So which one is it? Is his name Palti or his name Paltiel? Some Rav Yochanan. Palti Shemo, his real name was Palti. The Lama Nikash Shemo Paltiel. So why was he called Paltiel? Shipilito. Because in the lesson of saving, Shipiltio El min ha'avera, because Hashem saved him from sin. Me'asa, what did he do that he deserved Hashem to help save him from sin? So now Shaul gives him to marry Michal. He comes home, he has to be in the same room with her. He takes a sword and he puts it between himself and her. And he gets in the middle of the bedroom, or wherever their beds were. And he said, whoever engages in this, becoming intimate, will be impaled with this sword. Should be killed with this sword. Now, before we move on, I bring the famous explanation by Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, and then later Rosh Yeshiva, Yeshivas Mir, Yerushalayim, in his Sefer Sihat Musar, he asks there, he says, big deal, he put his sword in the ground. Okay, so the first day, he felt strong about it. And he lived with Micha for many years in the same room. After some time, the sword is just a sword. You walk around the sword. You go this way, you go the other way. How is the sword stopping him? So he says, that wasn't just a sword. That when Paltiel put in the sword in the ground, he put it in with a feeling, with a thought. He put it in the ground and said, the same way that I feel today, and I know it's asur for me to be with her, as it's possible that she's married to David, this strong feeling that I have on day one, every time I see the sword in the future, I want this feeling to come back to me. And that's what he did when he put in the sword. And as such, because he did that with feeling and thought, HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved him from that sin. I remember when I was in NYU studying for nursing, we were doing a clinical, and I was paired up with this girl, and she asked me, it was a Goya, she knew something about Judaism. She said, I know you put on the yarmulke, kippah, in order to have fear of God. She even said Hashem. She said, but let me ask you, but when you put on the kippah, I guess the first minute you put it on, you feel it. And, that reminds you that there's fear of Hashem. But after the first minute, a few hours later, you really don't feel the yarmulke on your head. She said, I know when I put on a hat, I don't feel it after a couple of minutes or a couple of hours. So how does that help you continue to have fear? So I think based on what Rav Chaim Shmulevitz is saying, is that when you put on the yarmulke on the head in the morning, it's not stop throwing on the yarmulke on the head. You're supposed to actually think that this yarmulke I'm putting on now, the thought is that this is supposed to give me Yirat Hashem. That I'm supposed to put the fear of Hashem on my head. And the idea is that throughout the day, you should somehow remain cognizant, should somehow remain aware that the fear of Hashem is on you. And if you do that, Kadosh Baruch Hu should give you the ability to have Yirat Hashem for the whole day. I think that's based on this Gemara and the way Rav Chaim Shmulevitz learned it. I think that's shot in putting on a kippah as well. Now, the Gemara says, but the pasuk writes, "V'achtiv vayelech ita isha." Now, David HaMelech, after Shaul dies, he's getting back Michal, and it says that her husband Palti went with her to go back to David. He called him her husband. So how could she be a husband? How could it be the husband if they weren't together? The Gemara answers, "Shena'aseh laki isha." He became like a husband. You look in Rashi. Rashi says, "Shena'aseh laki isha, shehaya migadela umehaveva," because he supported her and because he cherished her. The Gemara says from here, basically, is a big Shalom Bayit lesson, that in order to be a husband, it's not being intimate. That doesn't make a person a husband. Yes, that should only happen with a husband, but it's not what makes a husband a husband. According to the Gemara, a husband is someone who supports and cherishes his wife. Big Shalom Bayit lesson right there. But it says, any questions? No. Haloch uvachol. That when Paltiel was walking her back to David, he was walking and crying. That he had to give her up. What? If he's never actually with her, never really was married, why was he crying? Because he had a mitzvah to stay away from her. And now that she's going away to David, he's not going to have to challenge his Yetzer Hara anymore. The Gemara Makot Chav Gimel tells us that if a person stays away from Avera, it's as if he did a mitzvah. So that mitzvah that he had from staying away from her, he's not going to have that anymore. And for that, he was crying. Ad Bahurim, until he came to the place called Bahurim. The Gemara is darshaning Bahurim as a Bachur, as being a boy, meaning before having intimate relations. Shena'asu shenehem ki Bahurim, that they both became like youths, like Bahurim, meaning Shelo ta'amu ta'ambiyah. They totally forgot what it is to be intimate. They so much were Kedusha that they didn't even have thoughts of sexual relations at all. Completely left them. They became like young people who don't think of such things, who never tasted, don't know of these things. Okay, that's the Gemara on Paltiel. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says we have 3 tzaddikim in the Torah who stayed away from sin with a woman: Yosef, Boaz, and Palti. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says, Tokfo shel Yosef al matanuto shel Boaz. Whatever Yosef did was small compared to what Boaz did. Tokfo shel Boaz al matanuto shel Palti ben Laish. Whatever Boaz did was considered small compared to the act of Palti ben Laish. Okay. Tokfo shel Yosef al matanuto shel Boaz. Yosef's work was less than Boaz. Let's think for a second. Yosef Tzaddik was in Mitzrayim, and Eshet Potiphar was trying to get him to sin. And every day she would come, wear different clothing, and she would try to get him to to sin. But you remember, she was a married woman. Also, the Egyptians weren't so beautiful. Okay, so Dichtiv, but it says by Boaz, by Hiba Chati Halayla, by Yechirada Ish Vayilafet, that Boaz was in the middle of the night and he was startled. He wakes up, and right there laying in the bed is Ruth. And remember, Ruth is a pnuya, she's single, right? So technically there's no Avera. My Vayelafet, what does the pasuk mean Vayelafet? He turned about Vayelafet. Amarav, Shina'asa Bisero, Kirashe Befatot. That he became aroused, his organ became hard. He became he became ready to be with Ruth, and he held himself back. So look at Rashi. Nitkasha, his aver became hard. Va'afa became kavashithro. He held back his yetzer. Va'afa bishipinuya hayita. Even though she was single, and there's really no avera there. She already was in the bed. About Yosef, even though Yosef was very great and he stayed away from Eshet Potiphar, she was a married woman. It's easier to stay away from a married woman. And she was never in the actual bed with Yosef. So although Yosef is great and we say be like Joe and stay away from sin, however, Boaz was on a much higher level. Now, as much as great Boaz was, so Boaz Boaz, whatever he did, was nothing compared to Palti. Why? The Rashi says, the Ilu Boaz had the Laila. Boaz had only one night to stay away from Ruth. Right? He came, he said, I'm going to go find out from Tov, if you're okay, not, and then I'll marry you. But Palti ben Laish, Shanim Rabot, he was living as husband and wife with her for many years. And he never crossed over that sword. So we see the greatness of Palti ben Laish. The Paltiel ben Laish, he was able to overcome his Yetzer Hara for years, which is a much harder thing to do. You know, some people we can fight a Yetzer Hara for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, hour, 2, maybe a day, maybe 2 days, and after a while the Yetzer Hara overcomes us. That's Shalom. The Palti ben Laish shows us that it's possible to overcome the Yetzer Hara for many years. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. My dichtiv, it says in Mishlei, right? Right. First of all, there was a minhag by many gedolim that they would say this on in Eshet Chayil on Friday night. So Rabot Banot Asuhayil means many girls are great, very great. which is very contradictory to the whole Eshet Chayil, because the beginning of Eshet Chayil is Eshet Chayil mi yimsa, who can find an Eshet Chayil? Then at the end of Eshet Chayil, it says Rabot Banot Asu Chayil. Many women are Asu Chayil, do great stuff. The At Alit Al Kulana. But then we say you are the greatest. So many Gedolim had a minhag that when they were singing in the part, the At Alit Al Kulana, they would just point their finger at their wife, that you, the At Alit Al Kulana. However, you should just know, Shlomo Melech did not write Eshet Chayil for his wife. He actually wrote it for his mom. It was actually for his mother, not for his wife. However, we sing it as an ode to our wife. Just interesting to note that. Okay, so what does this mean? Rabot banot asu chayil. Many people, many girls do great stuff, are very virtuous. Ze Yosef uVoaz. This is Yosef and Boaz. At alita al kulana, but the greatest of them all, the Palti ben Laish, is Palti ben Laish. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman Rabbi Yonatan. My dichtiv. What does it say in Mishlei? Sheker achen behevel hayofi. Isha yirat Adonai hitit halal. Sheker achen. False is grace. Ze Yosef. Remember, Eish Potiphar was not beautiful at all. All that she had was a little bit of hen, a little bit of grace. She dressed it nicely, so she looked a little bit favorable. She wasn't actually beautiful. So Sheker achen, Yosef Rebbe realized this is all false. Even the charm that she had was false. Behevel hayofi. And false's beauty is in Boaz. Boaz was able to realize, even though Ruth was beautiful, that it was all fake also. He was able to stay away from sin. Yirat Hashem hitit halal. The one who's the greatest, and we really fears Hashem, Palti ben Laish, because Michal was the most beautiful from all these women mentioned. Michal being a Jewish woman, being the most beautiful, and yet Palti ben Laish was able to stay away from her for the longest. Now, Gemara is going to give a different shot in this pasuk. Davar acher. Sheker achen, when it says false is charm, zeh dorosh shel Moshe. This is the generation of Moshe who learned Torah. They got the Torah, they got Matan Torah. However, their Torah learning was considered somewhat weak. Sheker achen. Behevel hayofi zeh dorosh shel Yehoshua. This is a generation of Yehoshua who entered Eretz Yisrael, who are now being able to make all the mitzvot of the Torah. Even then, it was considered somewhat of a heaven hayofi. Yirat Hashem hitit halal. Who is the great one that really feared Hashem? Zed dorosh Chizkiah. This was the generation of Chizkiah. During the generation of Chizkiah, every single Jew, man, woman, child, knew all the Torah, even the most complex Torah of Tumah v'Tahara. You couldn't find a child or a woman who didn't know the answers to it. And that was considered the greatest of the learning from all of them. Davar acher, another way to explain it, Sheker achen, zeh dorosh shel Moshe v'Yehoshua. False's charm, that's Moshe and Yeshua's generation. They had Torah, but it wasn't complete. Behevel hayofi, and false is vain is beauty. Zeh dorosh Chizkiah. This is the generation of Chizkiah. Even though they learned and everyone knew, still not so great. Yirat Hashem hitit halal. Which generation was the learned the best? Zeh dorosh Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Ilai. This is the generation of Yehuda bar Ilai, Rabbi Ilai. What was so great about his generation? Amar Alav Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Ilai. Shehayu shisha talmidim mitkasin bitalit achat be'oskim b'Torah. They were so poor. They didn't have any money. One cloak, one coat for 6 people. That one big blanket for 6 people, and they would all stay under the cloak and they would learn Torah. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu's generation had a lot of money. They had Bizat Hayam, Yehoshua, they conquered the Canaan, they found a lot of money. Chizkiah was a very rich king. He was a very powerful king. Baruch Hashem, he saved the Jewish people from Sanhedrin. But the generation that learned Torah out of poverty, they were considered the greatest. Now, before we move on, I would be remiss not to mention, again, a great Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, Mashiach, and later Rosh Yeshiva, Yeshivat Mir Yerushalayim, on his take on what it means this generation was the greatest. And he says as follows. He says, how could you have 6 people using one blanket? You think about it. Imagine you're on 6 people on your bed. Take your kids, put them all on the bed, and put one regular sized blanket. What's going to happen? every kid's going to want to pull the blanket to themselves. Someone's not going to have the blanket. So Chaim Shmulevitz says that's what's going to happen. So how can you have 6 people learning biyachad? He says the only way that can happen is if everyone's pulling the blanket towards the other person, not towards themselves. Everyone's trying to cover someone else. He says, yes, there was Achdus by the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. You had by Yehoshua, everyone was together, they were fighting a war. You had with Chizkiyahu, everyone was together. But the truth is together is when you love someone so much that you're willing to give them your blanket and helping them instead of yourself. And this learning Torah with that amount of love for another Jew cannot be compared to the other generations. That's the way that Chaim Shmulevitz learns that piece of Gemara. Okay, and all that can be found in the Sichat Musar of Chaim Shmulevitz. They actually have it in English, not all of his Sichos Musar, but part of it. Art School made it many years ago. Very good sefer. If you really want to learn some Jewish philosophy of how to think, and in the yeshiva style of Musar, style of thinking through the Parshiot, Chaim Shmulevitz is a very good sefer. It really broadened your mind for a lot of things. Unfortunately, they only translated a selection of his works. I have the Hebrew version. There's a lot more stuff in there, a lot of good stuff in there. Okay. Met law met. We can now start a new Mishnah. If a king had one of his relatives die on him, so he's not allowed to go to the Levaya. He's not allowed to go out to the Levaya. Asur. He's a king, not kavod for him to go out for someone's funeral procession. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, no, if he wants to go out, he can go out. So we find that David HaMelech went after Avner's funeral. It says that David HaMelech was going after the coffin of Avner. The Rabbanan said to Yehuda, no. David HaMelech had to calm down the nation. Okay, this requires a little bit of background information of what happened here. So basically what happens is, David HaMelech was made king by Shmuel. No one really accepts him. Shaul is trying to kill him. Shaul died with some of his children. And at that point, David HaMelech becomes king only in the city of Hebron, which is under Yehuda. He's their king for about 5 years. At that point, Avner is one of the generals from Shaul's camp. He's a big influencer. At that point, David HaMelech is trying to get Avner to say that he's the king, and Avner disagrees. Avner takes one of the remaining children of Shaul, named Ishbosheth, and he puts him as king. Ishbosheth is king for about 2.5 years. I saw some places says he died, some places says something happened. Anyway, he's removed as king after 2.5 years. So David HaMelech again reaches out to Avner, and at this point, Avner agrees. So Avner has a meeting with David in Hebron. Avner agrees that David HaMelech should be king. Avner is on his way to go tell the Jewish people that David's going to be king. And guess what? David's general, Yoav, comes and kills Avner. So now the nation is in an uproar. They're very upset that David HaMelech's general killed Avner. Why did David HaMelech's general Yoav kill him? Yoav had a brother, Amasa. And during one of the wars between Shaul and David, Amasa and Avner got into a fight. And Avner said, listen, I'm going to kill you. You better go away. Amasa was very fast. He said, you're not going to kill me. I'm going to hit you first. So he started circling him around. Avner was huge and strong. Avner stuck out his hand, and Amasa ran right into it and died. Okay? It was like a pressure point where he died. Yoav was upset with Avner because he said if you really wanted to stop him, you could have hit his legs, you could have hit something else. You put it in such a point that you killed him. You probably hit his heart or whatever. And Yoav wanted to take revenge. So as soon as Avner entered the camp of Yehuda, which was under David HaMelech in the city of Hebron, Yoav took his chance to kill Avner. David HaMelech was really upset because he was trying to make peace between the Jewish people. And Yoav kind of messed it up. So David HaMelech had to go and make peace. And that's why the Rabbanan say that David Melech went after the coffin of Avner because he was trying to tell the people it wasn't him. He didn't order the hit, right? He didn't order the hit on Avner. He actually had peace with Avner. It was Yoav's own doing that led it. Eventually, when David Melech, before he nifter, he tells Shlomo Melech that you have to punish Yoav because he killed Avner and he killed one of David Melech's children. One of David Melech's children went against David Melech, and he told Yoav bring him back, but Yoav had other plans. This child had long hair, got stuck in the tree, and Yoav killed him. And because of these two deaths, David Melech asked Shlomo Melech to take revenge on Yoav. Anyway, that is the background information needed to understand that piece of Gemara, that piece of Mishnah. And now, Uchshemabrin Oto, and when they feed the king the mourner's meal, Kol ha'am mistubin al haaretz, hu mesev al hadragash. Everyone sits on the floor, but the king, in order to give him some respect, he sits on the dargash. He sits on the bed called as a dargash. Okay? Tana Rabbanon. The rabbis say, if you have any questions, you can ask. Malcolm shenohagu nashim letzet aharimita yotzeod. Those places that the women have been minhag to go in the funeral procession after the men, after the coffin is carried off by the men, they go after, then that's what they should do. In the places where they have the minhag, in the places that have minhag to go in front of the coffin, they should go in front of the coffin. Now, Tosafot says, Nashim l'tza'et l'fnei hamita, woman to go in front of the coffin, the kivan, the sha'at sarhu, because it's a painful time, leika lemichash lehirhur. We're not worried that people are going to have bad thoughts. If the men are behind and the women in the front, the men are going to be looking up, looking at the women, oogling them, which would be asur. However, because it's a funeral, people are in a sad state of mind. They're not going to do that. Where the Yishalmi says, "Pligi ikol amanda omar b'fnei hamita l'fi shegarmu mita l'olam." The reason why the women go in front is because they cause death to come to this world with eating the forbidden fruit back in Bereshit. Now those who have minhag to go after for the women to go after the coffin, the men before the coffin, the fishignai livnot Yisrael because it's disgusting for the girls of Israel to be stared by the men. And just to, I think today people would agree that even during sad times, unfortunately, Yetzer Hara still works on people. So I believe nowadays, if the women do follow, Solomon, you tell me if I'm correct, the women go after the coffin, right? The men go first and then the woman. Is that the way it happens?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That would make sense. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, La'oila Nashim Lifnei Mitot Yotzot. Rabbi Yehuda said, based on a pasuk, the woman should always go in the front. She came at Tina David. We found by David. She said by David, she Yatzar Chamito Shel Avner. She never Melech David Holach Acharei Amita. That when Avner died, it says David Melech went behind the coffin. Must be he was with the men, and the women were in the front. Amalai Chama said no. When David Melech was going after the coffin, he wasn't going to walk with the men. He was going to calm everybody down, to tell them that it wasn't his fault. First, he was by the men, and he was explaining himself. And then he was by the woman and explaining himself. Then he went from the woman back to the men. He was going back and forth, crying, showing that he was very upset, explaining that it wasn't him. As it says, and everyone realized that it wasn't from the king to kill Avner. After David Melech's display, everyone realized that David Melech didn't order the hit on Avner. So therefore, there's no proof that the men were in the back and the women were in the front. Darash Rava. Rava says, "My dichtiv." What does it mean by Yavol kol ha'am lahavrot David? And all the nation came to feed David. Ketiv lahachrot. It's written lehachrot, which means to cut. Or krinan lahavrot, but we read it lehavrot, to feed. The Gemara wants to explain. At first, everyone came and wanted to kill David. But once once they realized David wasn't at fault, in the end, they came to feed him as he came to what's it called to honor the dead. Amr Yehuda Amar Rab. Mipnei ma ne'enash Avner. Because of why? Because of what was Avner punished? What did Avner do wrong that he was killed like that? Nothing just happens in a vacuum. Someone died. It's something that happened. So Gemara says, because he could have protested against Shaul and he didn't. Rashi says, what does it mean he could have protested? Protested against what? Beharigat Nov Ir HaKohanim. When Shaul got report from Achitophel that the Kohanim were helping David, he wanted to kill all the Kohanim, which he did in the end. And that point, what's his name? Avner should have protested, and he didn't. So now he was getting punished. Rabbi Yitzchak says, no, Avner did protest, but he wasn't heard. And both of them, Mikra Echad Darshu. They're both learning the same pasuk. Why? It says, by Kanona Melech Avner Hakemot Naval Yemut Avner. Yadechalo Asurot Vegelechalo Len Chushtayim Hugashu. David Melech, when crying about Shaul, said, should Avner have died as a worthless person? Was his hands not tied? Your hands were not tied, your feet were not placed in chains. According to when it says, he did not protest, this is what he was saying. Your hands were not tied, your feet were not tied. Why didn't you protest? That's why you have fallen like a nobody. Because you didn't protest, that's why you're getting punished now. According to the one who says that he protested, but he wasn't answered, David Melech didn't say it in a way that I just read. It was like a reason way, but rather he was saying these psukim in a question, a lashon bitmia, a wonderment. He said, do you die like a worthless person? Your hands, they were not tied. You did protest. Your feet were not tied. You did protest. Why did you fall like a nobody? Meaning, David Melech said the psukim in the question mode. Why did you die? So either David Melech said it in a statement mode, you died because you didn't protest, or David Melech said it in a question mode, you did protest, so why did you die? Now, the one who said, according to the one who says he did protest, so why was Avner being punished and being killed now? Because Avner was killed because he what's it called, put 2.5 years more to wait for David and Melech to become king. The way Rashi learns is that 5 years after Shaul and Melech died, there was no king for Klal Yisrael, just a king for Hebron, for David and Melech, for Shevet Yehuda, no king for the rest of Klal Yisrael. They didn't accept David, and then Avner put Shaul's son Ishbosheth for the next 2.5 years. Until that point, David and Melech didn't have full control. Therefore, because he put Ishbosheth in place for 2.5 years, and he extended David and Melech's time from not being king, therefore he was punished. That's the way the Gemara ends there. All right, we have one more big Gemara to do. It's not really so big. This next Gemara, I think you guys were around when we started Moed Katan. I think we did this Gemara and Moed Katan together also. So let's just take a look. So the question really is, oh, Shavrinoto, my dargash. It said when you give the king who's a mourner, you give him to eat, he has to sit on the dargash. So the question is, what's a dargash? The Gemara is going to start off trying to explain it one way. It's going to change to something else eventually. So what is the first explanation? Amar Ula, Arsad Gada, the special bed of good luck. It was a decorated bed that they had in the house. It wasn't a usable bed. It was a bed that was used for good luck. You had it in the house. It was a rich type of looking bed, and you had it. It made you feel rich, and hopefully you would get rich that way. So the question is, can it really be a bed of good luck? All the days of his life, you have this good luck bed in your house, and you never sat on it. And today, when someone dies in him, now he sits on it. Doesn't make any sense. Maskeflura Rava says, my kushya. There's no question. Dilma, me the hava achila ushtia. The ha idna lo echlina lo ashikena. Hashta kamachlina lo vekamashkina le. Rava said that's not a question. Why? Up until today, the king feeds himself. He always has enough food for himself. And today, other people have to come and feed him because he's a mourner. So also, all the days he doesn't sit in that bed. And today he sits on it. Not a question. Today is different than other days. Elia, kasha al kasha. If you have a question, this is the question. Dargash, the halacha is ein tzarich lechfot el zukufo. The halacha is that during the times of the Tamilical times, they would have to turn over all their beds in their house when someone died. You have to show that you were in pain, so you turned it over. Today, we don't do this. Various reasons why we don't do it, either because we're not in Eretz Yisrael under Mashiach, or the guy will look at us like we're doing witchcraft, or it's just not practical. Whatever the reasons is, there's tons of reasons why they give. We don't do that. However, in the times of Talmud, they had to do that. However, the halacha was when you have a dargash, according to one opinion, instead of taking the bed and turning it upside down, you would take the dargash and you make it standing upwards. Okay? Dargash and you make it stand up. And if you think it's a bed of good luck, why, if it's a bed of good luck, why can't you just turn it upside down? It says in the halacha, you turn over the bed. Not only his bed that he turned over, all of it he turns upside down. All the beds in the house. So the dargash also should be turned upside down. Why don't you turn it upside down? The Gemara says, my kushya. No, it's not a question why he doesn't turn it upside down. Dilma, maybe, you can compare it to a bed that's used for utensils. You have a bed that you're not sleeping on, but you're using it to store, a storage bed, tiktani. If you're using it to store kalim, you don't have to turn it over. So too the dargash is not a bed you sleep on, decorated bed, so you don't have to turn it over. You leave it this way. Either akash or hakash. If you have any questions, this is the question. A dargash, you untie its strings and it falls by itself. Okay? Shimon Gamliel is arguing on the Tanakama. Tanakama says you take the dargash and you put it standing. He says you untie the strings and you let the mattress fall. Now, karvitin, before we move on the word karvitin, here in the Steinsaltz, he tells us the word karvitin, which the Gemara used as the straps for the mattress, comes from the Greek word of krabatos, okay, which means mattress, couch, mesh, or straps supporting the mattress of the bed. It could either be the mattress or it could be the straps that hold up the mattress. If you think about it, it's similar to the Russian word of kravat, right, of a bed. It's actually related to this Greek word and the word that's found in the Gemara. It's all words come from Lashon HaKodesh in the end, right? Like we explained in the Parsha here. So it's very interesting to look at different languages when you're reading it to understand how it is. So kravat, as you're reading it here, is a mattress, is part of the bed. So according to Shimon Gamliel, you drop the mattress. Now, so if it's a decorated bed, right, as a bed of good luck, it doesn't have a mattress. It's just decoration. It's not functional. And it's Rabin Amar Amar Li Hahumer Rabban Rav Tachlifa Shemei. When Rabin came, he said Rav Tachlifa told him that he was spending time in the leather market. And they explained to him what's a dargash. It's a bed of a leather cot. It's a leather mattress. Basically, it's a wooden frame with a leather mattress in it. That's what a dargash was. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yochanan, dargash, a dargash, sirug mitocho. A dargash, it is attached through the inside. Mita surugem al gaba. However, a bed is attached from the outside. What does this mean? I'll show you an example here. If you take a look over here, the top picture, if you see it, in the top picture, it goes through the wooden pole. You see? That's within. That's the dargash. It goes from within. Where this is right now the way the Gemara is explaining it. And then the next picture is where it goes over the wooden frame. And that's again just for a diagram. That's called a bed. Okay. Now for the bed, although here in the picture it shows us a little part that goes over the beam, the way it actually was is that it went over the whole beam on the side, or at least that's what the Gemara is going to think. Meitve. So right now, dargash is a leather cot. The difference between the leather cot and the regular bed, the leather cot, it's within the side beams, whereas the bed goes over the side beams. The Gemara says, is this really true? Meitve. When does a wooden utensil get tuma? Hamita, anisa, mishushefem beor hadak. Remember, any unfinished product does not get tuma. It has to be considered a finished product. So when does a bed or a crib become considered a finish? When it's sanded down with fish skin. Steinsaltz brings down the most common fish skin that was used in the olden days, this area of Israel or in Iraq, that was used was the cow-tail stingray. Ever went to the aquariums and you saw the stingray, right? It has like this big body in the front and a long string and the coming out of the end. Apparently that skin was very, very conducive to smoothing out wood. Now, the imitam is ma'al gaba. If you're telling me that the strapping around the side beams, the mattress straps go around the side beam, lama li shifat or hadag. Why would I smooth the wood frame? It's going to be covered with rope anyway. It's going to be immaterial. I don't care if it's smooth or not. It's covered up. So Gemara explains, no. Okay, now I'll tell you what the difference between a dargash and a regular bed. So we know dargash is leather mattress, where regular bed is not. Second difference is both of these are tied within. Mita aule ba'puke bizrune, dargash aule ba'puke be'ifkata. The difference is as follows. The bed is actually going in through the side beams of the side beam itself. It goes through loops in the side beams, a little hole in the side beam, and you tie it into the side beam. However, for a dargash, the mattress doesn't attach itself to the side beam, but off the side beams are hooks, and the leather mattress is attached to the hooks, and it hangs on by the hooks like a cot. It hangs on by the hooks, and that's where the leather mattress is, and that's the dargash. And that's the dargash that the king would sit on when he was in mourning, and everyone else would sit on the floor, and he would sit on the dargash. Tanakama said you would take the dargash in a regular house and you stand it up this way. However, halacha of Shimon Gamliel that instead of standing it up, you just unattach the hooks and let the mattress fall down. The leather mattress go down. Amr Yaakov Bar Ami Mita Shniktaleya, and Mita who Shniktaleya Yotzein, who has poles sticking out. Zokfa v'dayah. You put it on its side. You stand it up. What does this mean? It's like your 4-poster bed. Okay. So if you have your 4-poster bed or 2-poster beds, we have beams coming up, like the fancy people have, they have curtains around or whatever it is. And those beds, if you're going to turn it upside down, you're going to break it. We don't want you to break your stuff. Therefore, you stand it up on the side, and that would already be enough to show that your person is in mourning. Okay. Any questions? All right, the halacha is as follows: that any wooden item is not considered halachically able to accept tumah unless it's a finished product. Usually, when it's sanded down. The halacha about women walking behind the coffin. That is the halacha in generations. In later generations, women were accustomed to follow the mitah of the dead. Okay, let's just go through the Mishnah, and then we'll, B'ezrat Hashem, next week start again from the Mishnah over there. Okay, the Mishnah says, "Umotzi lim lechemet hareshut al pi bedin shivim ve'echad." He takes out the army to go out to a melchemet reshut, a discretionary war. It means a war that's not a mitzvah. So it's not something to protect Eretz Yisrael. It's not to fight Amalek. It's not to fight the 7 nations. He wants to go to extend the land, or he wants to show the might of the Jewish people. So this, he needs permission, even though the king is the king, and so far he has everything he wants he can do. However, he needs permission of the court of 71. It's a royal license. The power of the king is to force the Shabbat to make a war, but it's a limitation. He cannot do such a war without the approval of the Sanhedrin. That's note 7 from the Ran. Lahalacha, the Rambam writes, a king can only force people into the war if the court of 71 agrees. They can't draft people into the war unless the Sanhedrin agrees to that war. He can be pared together, meaning he can break through fences and make a path for himself through people's fields, and no one could protest against him. And derech hamelech ein lo shiur, and there's no amount of how wide the road or how long the road can be. King can do any size road, as much as he needs, he can take. Ha'am bozizin v'notenin lo, and during the war, the plunder that they get, they bring before the king. He takes his share first, which is about half of the spoils. He gets to choose first. A king, when the Rambam learns that when he can make a road, it's when he's at war. A king at war is not required to change his path in order to avoid trespassing or destroying private property. He may knock down and trample any fence, field, or vineyard in his way, according to his needs, without limitation. The Rambam does stress, though, only during war. There are Rishonim that argue and say it can be done anytime. We're going to see more about this, B'ezras Hashem, in the Gemara. I mean, we have the whole issue with Achav wanting to take Naval's field, and was a whole to-do. That's the Tosfos Melech Mutar on the top over there. B'ezras Hashem, next week, we will look into it. Any questions, or we're calling it a day?
Compensation sign well for that?
Not necessarily, no. No, the king has the right to take anything he wants. Or together. Next week we'll go into it more. Any questions from today's share?
It's under the law of eminent domain.
Right, that's similar to the Jewish, to the American eminent domain law. That's good.
Yeah.
Right. Even today in America, they need your, not only for war, they hold for anything. If they need it for a government project or something like that, they can technically force a person out. But there is compensation. Yeah, I believe they will give you something reasonable somewhere else, but they can do whatever they want, basically. That's the power of government. All right. All right. Tov me'od. Let me turn off the recording.